You could say I grew up in that company. Not in the literal sense, of course. I was already in my late 20s when I walked through the front doors for the first time, but professionally it shaped me. The walls, the hum of old printers, even the slightly burnt smell from the overused breakroom microwave, it all felt like home. I'd been there 19 years, nearly 2 decades of grinding, mentoring, and sticking around through every restructure and budget cut. I watched the tech stack evolve, systems get torn down and rebuilt, and people come and go like the tide. Through it all, I stayed, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I believed in what we were building. They used to call me the anchor, not in a flashy way, just dependable, solid. I wasn't chasing promotions. I wasn't schmoozing at networking events. I was the guy you called when the server crashed at 2 a.m. or when a junior analyst burst into tears over their first client presentation. I was there, always there. So when I heard we were getting a new department head, a guy from another firm with a modern approach and a vision for the future, I'll admit I felt a twitch of unease. Still, I didn't panic. People come and go, titles change. I'd seen more VPs in my time than I could count. They all had grand ideas and PowerPoint decks with buzzwords like synergy and agile transformation. I figured this guy would be no different. His name was Kieran, sharp suit, sharper smile, the kind of guy who called everyone mate on the first day like we were old drinking buddies. He had a firm handshake and this unnerving way of making eye contact a second too long, like he was scanning you for weaknesses. I knew his type before he even opened his mouth. I'd worked under a few like him over the years. They show up swinging, eager to clean house and streamline inefficiencies, and before long half the team's been shuffled or let go. Still, I gave him a fair shot. I always do. I sat in on the meetings, gave him the benefit of the doubt, even when he asked the kind of questions that revealed he didn't understand half of what our department actually did. That's the thing about experience, it gives you patience. I figured he'd learn. But he didn't. By his second month, Kieran had started making comments. Subtle ones at first about legacy systems and how we needed younger energy. Then came the meetings I wasn't invited to. Then he brought in his own people, consultants, he called them, kids in their mid-20s with high-end laptops and buzzwords spilling out their mouths like they were reading off cue cards. And then one afternoon, he asked me to have a chat. We sat in a glass office that still smelled like new carpet. He didn't look me in the eye that time. Just fiddled with a pen and said, "Look, mate, you've been an asset, truly, but we're moving in a new direction. We need to be lean, fast, adaptive. You know how it is." I didn't argue, I didn't plead, I just nodded. He was expecting a reaction, anger, maybe even tears, but I'd been around too long for that. There was no dignity in begging, so I shook his hand, told him I appreciated the opportunity, and walked out with my head high. The funny thing is, the office was quieter than usual that day. People saw me leave with that envelope, and I could feel the shift in the air. Whispers, glances, they all knew. What Kieran didn't know, what he couldn't understand in all his youthful arrogance, was that while I may not have had the newest certification or the flashiest LinkedIn profile, I had something else. Trust, loyalty, real bonds forged over late nights, impossible deadlines, and quiet victories that never made the quarterly slides. The team, they weren't mine, but over the years I'd trained them, protected them. I was the one who stayed behind when their leads moved on. I backed them up, taught them the systems inside out, helped them navigate the politics, and stood between them and the fire when clients got restless. And now I was gone. But what Kieran didn't know was that I wasn't going to stay gone. He'd taken me out of the picture like I was a broken piece of machinery. What he failed to realize was that I wasn't the cog, I was the oil that kept the whole damn thing running. You take that out and everything grinds eventually. And sure enough, things started to grind. I got texts, emails, quiet phone calls. "Hey, you got time for a coffee? Can I ask you something about that deployment setup? Is it true you're thinking of starting something new?" I didn't answer all of them, not at first. But I felt it coming. Something was shifting. And this time, I wasn't just going to sit quietly and watch it happen. 2 weeks, that's all it took. 2 weeks after I walked out of that building with my dignity wrapped inside a manila envelope, the cracks started to show. I didn't need to be inside the office to know it. The calls came like clockwork, early mornings, late nights. I wasn't keeping score, but I remembered every name. People I'd trained from scratch, people I'd fought for when HR wanted to cut costs. They weren't just colleagues, they were friends, and now their voices sounded nervous, uncertain, frustrated. "I don't get it," one of them, Julia, told me over coffee. "We're working twice as hard and it's like none of it's clicking. That new guy Max, he's leading our team now, brought in by Kieran, he doesn't know the backend, keeps saying he'll circle back on stuff he doesn't understand, but deadlines don't wait." Julia was sharp, one of the best problem solvers I'd seen in my career. A fast learner, resilient. I'd seen her pull an all-nighter to save a client presentation once, then come back the next day with a tray of donuts for the team like it was nothing. So hearing her sound so uncertain sent a chill through me. But I didn't gloat, I didn't say I told you so, that's not my style. I just listened, took mental notes quietly. Then another call came in, this time from Nate. He was younger, just a few years into his career, but he had a mind like a sponge and a heart big enough to carry any team. "We can't get any approvals without Kieran jumping in," he said, voice tight with frustration. "He keeps saying we need to think like disruptors, but no one knows what that means. It's all talk, and now the client's threatening to walk." That one hit me hard. The client he was talking about, Pacific Systems, was one I'd nurtured personally for years. I'd been there when they were just a risky pilot project. I'd held their hand through their first security breach, stayed on the phone with their CTO till midnight more times than I could count. They trusted me not just because I delivered, but because I never lied to them. I never overpromised, never blamed others. I just got the job done. Now I was gone, and they were threatening to walk. Kieran's grand vision was starting to wobble. But he didn't know it yet, because while the problems were surfacing, his polished optimism was still convincing the higher-ups that everything was on track. He was good at that: optics, presentations, talking big in meetings with just enough technical jargon to confuse the execs but not enough substance to expose his lack of real understanding. Meanwhile, inside the office it was chaos. I'd heard they stopped doing the Friday team syncs I used to lead, too old school, apparently. Instead, they replaced them with asynchronous task boards and innovation huddles led by consultants who barely knew which team did what. The result? Missed deadlines, confused roles, duplicate work, but worst of all, morale was crumbling. It's funny how quickly a team can unravel when trust is removed from the equation. When someone at the top assumes experience equals stagnation. When leadership values disruption over stability, flash over function. But I wasn't just going to sit around and watch the ship sink. I wasn't bitter, I wasn't angry, I was awake. I had time on my hands now, and connections, real ones, not the kind you collect on networking apps, but people I'd sweated alongside in server rooms and boardrooms, people who knew what I stood for, who'd watched me take the fall for mistakes that weren't mine just to shield the team. So I started sketching ideas. Not revenge, let's be clear about that. I wasn't trying to burn anything down, that's not who I am, but I could feel something rising, a question I hadn't let myself ask in a long time. What if I built something of my own? Not a startup for investors or a flashy app for downloads. I wasn't chasing headlines, I just wanted to build a team the right way, people first, values intact, clear roles, honest expectations. And a place where the phrase outdated wasn't used to discard experience but where wisdom could actually be an asset again. So I made a few calls of my own. Just feelers at first. A quiet coffee with an old colleague who'd left the industry but still had sharp instincts. A lunch with a freelance designer I'd worked with years ago. A dinner with my wife where I finally told her, I think I want to start something new. She didn't blink. She smiled, nodded. Took you long enough, she said. And just like that it began. Not with fireworks. Not with funding. But with a few scribbled notes, a trusted contact list, and a quiet kind of confidence I hadn't felt in years. The game wasn't over. It was just getting interesting. There's a strange kind of calm that comes right after a storm. Not peace exactly, more like a tense stillness, the kind you feel when you're watching something from a distance that you once had your hands in. That was me, standing on the sidelines, watching the mess Kieran was making and the silence that followed it. But under that stillness, something was starting to build. It started with Julia. She messaged me one evening after another long day. No small talk this time, just a question. If you're building something, I want in. 6 words, that was it, and I stared at them for a long time. Because I knew the risk she was taking even saying that. She still worked there. She had a good job, a mortgage, responsibilities, but she was willing to walk into uncertainty just to build something with me. That meant something, that meant everything. I didn't reply right away. I went for a walk instead, no headphones, no distractions, just air in my lungs and the sound of my footsteps on pavement. I needed to be sure this wasn't ego. I'd been burned, yes, but I didn't want revenge, I wanted purpose. And maybe this message was the sign that it was time to stop waiting for the right moment. So I replied, let's talk Saturday, my place. By the time the weekend came, we weren't alone. Nate showed up too. Then Priya, a systems engineer from the East team I hadn't spoken to in months, but who somehow caught wind that something was brewing. And that's how it went over the next few weeks: calls, texts, coffees, quiet meetings in living rooms and cafes. People I'd worked with for years showing up not because they wanted to jump ship, but because they were tired of sailing blind under a captain who didn't know the sea. It felt like we were building something underground, not a company, at least not yet, but a movement. We started small, listing out what we hated about how things were run: the bureaucracy, the lack of communication, the way good people got ignored while loud voices got promoted. And from that list we built the opposite. A values-first structure. No titles, just roles, clear responsibilities, flexible boundaries. Everyone would know what they were accountable for, but they could grow into more. Transparency in pay. Weekly syncs that weren't just about task updates but about well-being, and most importantly, no dead weight. We weren't going to be a place where coasting was allowed. You pulled your weight or you didn't stay. It was raw, unpolished, but it was ours. I remember that moment clearly. One night, maybe 2 a.m., the room half lit by a desk lamp, Julia asleep on the couch with spreadsheets open on her laptop, Nate on the floor surrounded by sticky notes, and I just sat there taking it in. This was happening. We were actually doing this. But the next step was the one I'd avoided the longest. Money. Ideas are beautiful, but they don't pay for servers, software licenses, or people's rent. We had skills, sure. Between us, we could launch something lightweight, maybe even get a few contracts. But for this to last, we needed funding or clients, preferably both. That's when the universe threw me a lifeline. Remember Pacific Systems, the client that was on the verge of walking out after I left? Their CTO, Dan, called me. He didn't ask how I was, didn't do the awkward small talk. Just said, "Can we meet?" We sat in a quiet booth in a pub near his office. He looked tired, stressed in a way I hadn't seen him before. Apparently things had gone from bad to worse since I left. Project delays, missed SLAs, miscommunication. Kieran had sent in Max and another consultant to reassess the scope, but what they'd really done was tangle everything up in new jargon and rework half the stable code I'd spent months perfecting. And now they were considering pulling the entire contract. "So what are you doing now?" Dan asked, eyes narrowed. I paused. This was the moment. This was either going to end in a polite drink and a handshake, or the spark that would light everything. "We're starting something," I said slowly. "Smaller, focused, agile in the real sense, not the buzzword way, no fluff, just results and people who actually care." He nodded, no smile, just quiet consideration. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Send me a proposal. If it's clean, you've got our business." I didn't say anything then, I didn't want to jinx it. But I walked out of that pub with a heartbeat louder than any noise in the street. Because I knew right then and there. This wasn't just an idea anymore. It was real. And Kieran had no idea what was coming. The hardest part wasn't writing the proposal. The hardest part was believing we were ready to send it. I sat at my desk with the draft open for hours. Pages and pages of everything we'd been building, a detailed breakdown of our service model, timelines, pricing structures, our commitment to transparency and delivery. It wasn't flashy. No corporate fluff, no brand buzzwords, just clarity, simplicity, a plan rooted in the reality of how good work gets done by people who give a damn. Julia had combed through every line twice. Nate had stress-tested the architecture plan. Priya had laid out the risks and the mitigations like a seasoned strategist. Every member of this quiet little rebellion had done more than their share, and still, as I hovered over the send button, my hand paused. It wasn't fear of rejection, it was something else, something heavier. What if this actually worked? Because if it did, then everything would change. We wouldn't just be a few disillusioned ex-colleagues in a living room, we'd be a real operation with a real client. Expectations, pressure, responsibility. It was one thing to critique the system from the outside, it was another to build something better. But that's the thing about leadership, it's not just about knowing what's wrong, it's about doing something right even when you're scared stiff. So I hit send. And I waited. Days passed, I kept myself busy pretending not to check my inbox every 15 minutes. We held meetings, ran through scenarios, updated our legal documents, but in the back of my mind, everything hinged on Dan, on Pacific Systems. On whether someone at the top was willing to put his trust in a group of people that had been written off as outdated by the same company they once held up. The reply came on a Wednesday. It was just 3 words. "Let's do this." I stared at them, barely breathing. No contract yet, no red lines, but that was Dan's way. If he said it, it would happen. That email was worth more than a signature. It was a vote of confidence in the people behind the plan, in me. That night I didn't sleep. Not out of anxiety, but because adrenaline had taken up permanent residence in my bloodstream. We had our first client. We were live. And it hit me like a train. We had to deliver. I called a team meeting the next morning. Everyone came early, even the ones who were still technically working at the old place. There was a crackle in the air, a mix of nerves and excitement. For the first time, we weren't reacting to a toxic environment, we were building our own. This is it, I told them. This is our moment, but let me be clear, we don't get to coast. We earn our trust every day from this point forward. That means no ego, no politics, and no passing the buck. We do the work, we do it well, and we stand by each other. They nodded, not the performative kind you get in boardrooms, but the kind you give when you know what's at stake. These people weren't chasing titles or corner offices, they just wanted to build something they could be proud of. Over the next week, we operated like a team possessed. Nate designed the deployment framework. Priya liaised with Dan's architecture team, ironing out specs and translating them into real-time configs. Julia managed the comms line, keeping everyone updated and handling client expectations like a veteran. And me, I was everywhere, reviewing code, fielding legal documents, calming nerves, ordering pizza, taking the 3 a.m. calls when someone panicked about a server spin-up. I wasn't above anything, I was in it with them. It felt right. More right than anything had in a long, long time. Meanwhile, back at my old company, word started leaking out. It wasn't intentional, we didn't post about it, we weren't trying to stir the pot. But people talk. Former colleagues bumped into each other, LinkedIn algorithms connected the dots, and slowly the pieces started falling into place. One afternoon, I got a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. "Did you seriously land Pacific?" I didn't answer, I didn't need to, the truth was already out there. And then came the meeting request from Kieran. He wanted to catch up. I stared at the screen for a full minute, letting it sink in. The man who told me I was outdated, that I didn't fit the new direction. The man who handed me a severance envelope like I was past my sell-by date wanted a catch-up. I clicked decline. No message, no explanation. Because I wasn't angry anymore. I was busy. I didn't reply to Kieran's meeting request, but I knew that wouldn't be the end of it. The next week I got a call from an unknown number. I let it ring out. A few seconds later a voicemail landed. It was short. His voice was flatter than usual, less arrogant, more unsure. "Hey, it's Kieran, just wanted to touch base. Been hearing things and well, I'd like to talk if you've got time, let me know." I didn't call him back. It wasn't out of spite, it was out of focus. Because while he was busy playing catch-up, we were sprinting ahead. Pacific Systems went live with our build just 10 days after the contract was signed. 10 days, that's unheard of in their world. And it wasn't a stripped-down MVP, it was a functioning, secure, tailored product that addressed every pain point they'd flagged during the Kieran months. The CTO, Dan, messaged me the night it went live. "Fastest turnaround we've had in 5 years, already seeing better latency, tell your team well done." I didn't reply right away, I just read that message over and over. Because those words weren't just about this project, they were validation for every moment I'd spent doubting myself after I got pushed out. We weren't just making something work, we were doing it better than they ever had. But as our success grew, so did the whispers. People at my old company started reaching out more directly. Some were cautious, some were outright angry, not at me but at how things had gone south under Kieran's rule. Missed deliverables, confused org charts, endless meetings that led to nothing. The vision he'd sold them on was starting to feel more like a mirage, and now word had it that the board was asking questions. A few even joked that Kieran had developed a nervous tic, tapping his pen furiously during meetings, asking where all the key contributors had gone. But it wasn't funny. Not to me. Because while some part of me did feel vindicated, another part just felt tired. Tired that this is how things go in so many companies. They see experience and assume inertia. They bring in change for the sake of change. And they forget that good leadership isn't about shaking things up, it's about knowing when not to. One day I got an email from Sarah. She was still with the company, middle management, smart, underappreciated. She never made noise, but she saw everything. Subject: quiet chat. I agreed to meet her at a little sandwich shop halfway between her office and mine. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. They're starting to panic, she said, biting into her tuna melt. The boards notice 3 client accounts are either leaving or talking to a new firm. They figured out it's you. I stayed quiet, let her talk. She leaned in. Kieran's scrambling, and honestly, people are ready to walk. If you're building something, I think they'd follow you. I raised an eyebrow. People like who? She listed 6 names. Every single one was someone I had worked with directly, people I'd mentored, people who'd once been overlooked but whom I had given space to grow. They weren't just good, they were the backbone of what that company used to be. And now they were ready to jump. That moment changed everything. Because up until then, we'd been playing a small game: keep it lean, focus on a few clients, grow slowly. But now, we had momentum. We had talent ready to walk out of an imploding system to join something they believed in. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about responsibility. If people were going to risk everything to follow me, then I had to build something worth following. I held a team meeting that night, not virtual, in person. We booked a room in a local co-working space. Everyone showed up. We're not just a side project anymore, I told them. We're becoming something bigger, and that means growing on purpose. But we don't compromise, no bloat, no politics. We take only the people who believe in the mission. Everyone agreed, no hesitation. And then Julia said something that stuck with me. We're not leaving something behind anymore, she said. We're building something better. And just like that, it became real. We started registering the company officially. Filed for incorporation. Redesigned the brand from scratch. New name, new voice, a culture guide built by the team, not handed down from some HR consultant. We weren't trying to be the next big thing, we just wanted to be the best thing for the people who worked with us and the clients who trusted us. And Kieran. He kept calling. I kept ignoring. Because we weren't in the same race anymore. He was trying to keep something from falling apart. We were building something that could never be broken the same way again. I'll never forget the morning everything came to a head. It was a Friday, cloudy, the kind of day where the sky just sort of hangs above you waiting. I just stepped out of a strategy session when my phone buzzed. 2 messages, one from Sarah, one from an old exec who hadn't contacted me in over a year. Sarah said simply, "Board is meeting today, major fallout expected." The exec's message was longer, but the core of it was the same. Can we talk? Things are falling apart faster than anyone expected. I read both messages and just stood there, one hand on the doorframe, still halfway in the meeting room. I knew something like this was coming. You can't bleed talent, fail deliverables, and hemorrhage trust without eventually hitting a wall. But the speed, it was faster than even I expected. I went back into the room where Julia, Nate, Priya, and 2 of our newer hires were gathered. I didn't say much, just held up my phone. They're imploding. No one cheered, no one smiled, that's not who we were. But there was a quiet, collective exhale, like something heavy had finally lifted. It had only been 3 months since I'd been let go, 90 days, and in that time the very same company that told me I wasn't part of the future was now frantically trying to hold on to the present. Projects were behind, clients were walking, senior staff were leaving, some out of frustration, others following the quiet trail we'd left behind. And now the board was stepping in. I didn't know exactly what would happen at that meeting, but I had a strong feeling about one thing. Kieran's time was running out. I wasn't watching gleefully. If anything, I felt sad. That place used to be a second home. So many of the systems and people I'd helped build were still there, now struggling under a leadership that never cared to understand them. But that was no longer my concern. Because while they were reacting, we were still building. The Pacific Systems project had led to 2 new referrals. One of them, a logistics company, was the biggest fish we'd ever landed. Their CTO said he'd heard about us through the grapevine and liked that we actually got stuff done. That was it. No fancy pitch needed, just results and reputation. But even bigger than that, the team was growing authentically. We had a strict no-fluff policy. Every new person who joined had to come with a reason for being here that wasn't just, "I'm looking for something new." We didn't want people running from something. We wanted people running to something. And they came. A project lead from the UK division, a QA engineer from my old testing group, even a data analyst from a completely unrelated firm who'd seen our mission statement online and said it was the first time a company's values actually felt like they meant something. Every onboarding call started with the same thing. Here, what we're not. We weren't a haven for people who wanted to hide. We weren't going to become the next bloated org full of committees and backchannels. We were lean, open, ruthlessly kind but honest, and everyone carried their weight. That culture started becoming our signature. Clients felt it, people noticed it, and slowly our name began to carry weight, not because we spent on ads or hired PR people, but because we did what we said we would do. That night Sarah called me again. She sounded exhausted. They fired him. Just like that, no build-up. Kieran was out. The board had voted after a heated meeting. Apparently, someone had presented a side-by-side comparison of our Pacific Systems delivery timeline against the disaster that had preceded it. There was no debate, no excuses left. He was gone. And they're panicking now, she continued. They want to restructure, bring in someone with institutional memory. They mentioned your name, actually. I didn't laugh, I didn't even sigh. I just said, "That chapter's closed, Sarah, I'm not going back." There was a pause. I figured, but they're scared. People are asking where you went, why no one fought harder to keep you. I let the silence hang there for a moment. Then I said, "Tell them the truth." I didn't leave because I was scared of change. I left because leadership had lost its soul, because they stopped listening, because they forgot that the ones doing the work usually know the answers, they just need space to speak. And now the fallout wasn't my burden. It was the consequence of their choices. Ours was a different path now. No longer in the shadows. We were building our own way. And we were just getting started. It was 6 months to the day since I walked out of that glass-walled office, envelope in hand, stripped of title and status but not of dignity. Half a year. That's not long in the grand scheme of things, but somehow it felt like a lifetime ago. A lot can change in 6 months. Our company, our team, was no longer just a collection of outcasts and misfits trying to build something out of frustration. We were legitimate, registered, growing, with clients that trusted us and staff who actually looked forward to Monday mornings, and not just because of some ping-pong table or office beer fridge. No, we didn't need gimmicks to keep people happy. We had something rarer: respect. That was the foundation everything else rested on. It was a Friday when we hosted our first full team gathering. No remote logins, no webcam boxes, just real people shaking hands, laughing, catching up in person. Some of us had worked together before. Some were new additions, faces that had never once stepped foot in our old office but who fit in instantly like they'd been here the whole time. We held it in a rented hall with no podiums or speeches, just one long table, shared food, conversations that didn't revolve around quarterly KPIs or looming deadlines. When it got late, people stayed. No one checked their watches. They just lingered, talked about their work, their families, their dreams. There was no rush to leave. And somewhere during that evening, it hit me. This was the culture we had always deserved. Not performative wellness workshops or fun emails from the CEO once a month, but real connection, real ownership. Everyone in the room felt seen, felt heard, and that, more than any delivery timeline or new client, was the victory. But not everything was a clean break. I still got emails from people at the old company, some apologetic, some curious, some just trying to make sense of how everything had fallen apart so fast. I never ignored them. I always replied, not to gloat, not to prove anything, just to remind them that things don't have to be the way they were. People deserve better than politics disguised as progress. One day, a message came from someone I'd never expected to hear from. "Kieran." The subject line was blank. The body of the email was short. "You were right. I didn't see it then. I see it now. No excuses, I hope you're doing well. Kieran." I stared at the screen for a long time. There was a time when I would have given anything to hear those words, when I needed validation, closure, something to prove that I hadn't been the problem. But now, Now I didn't need any of it. I didn't reply, not out of anger, not even out of pride. I just didn't need anything from him anymore. Because what we'd built, that was my answer. And in truth, it wasn't just mine, it belonged to all of us. Julia, Nate, Priya, Sarah, every person who'd taken a risk, every person who believed in the quiet power of consistency, trust, and integrity when the world seemed to worship disruption for disruption's sake. We'd taken something broken, walked away, and built a new path with our own hands. And now, we were helping others do the same. We started mentoring other teams, speaking quietly at community meetups, publishing open guides on how to build lean, values-first operations. We didn't charge for any of that, we didn't use it to market ourselves, it was just our way of paying forward what we'd learned the hard way. Because here's the truth no one talks about. Sometimes the future doesn't come from disruption. Sometimes it comes from rediscovery. From remembering what mattered before titles, buzzwords, and egos got in the way. We remembered. And now, we were living proof of what happens when the right people come together for the right reasons. No revenge. No drama. Just a better way.